Hello and welcome to the session. My name is Kojo Hesse and I'm a co-founder and director of ExpressPay Ghana Limited. ExpressPay is one of the leading financial technology firms in Ghana. I'm here today with the celebrated international business leader, author of The Bold New Normal and STEM advocate, Lucy Quist. She's the first Ghanaian woman to head a multinational telecommunications firm. As former CEO of Airtel Ghana, she's a co-founder of the Executive Women's Network, and she served as the Vice President of FIFA's Normalization Committee in Ghana. Lucy, welcome to this conversation.
Hello, and thank you for having me, Kojo.
Great. Today we're discussing the transforming business strategies with a key focus on digital business transformation. We're very excited to have you here to share your perspectives on this topic, given the wealth of experience you have had in the expansive roles you have played in companies you have worked with. Welcome once again.
Thank you. And hello to everyone who has joined us today.
COVID has impacted the global economy, including Ghana, very significantly. Almost every aspect of our lives has changed as a result of the effects of COVID. It's caused us to rethink many social norms and economic norms that we have taken for granted over most of our lives. Many people have said that the COVID-19 pandemic has brought home the need for businesses to undergo digital transformation. What is your take on this?
Great question. I think it's fair to say that COVID-19's pandemic has affected Ghana, but it has affected actually the whole world, right? So we as a global family find ourselves in this situation where in order to preserve life, and reduce illness and keep economies going somehow, we need to find ways to effectively change. So I think my take is that absolutely there's a need for transformation, some of it that largely in this time being driven by the pandemic. But I think the emphasis here is really on transformation and the fact that we need to change the way we do things going forward. And I know you and I are going to talk some more and get into, the nuts and bolts of it, but I think we have to really remember that at the heart of it is the word transformation. It's almost as though digital starts to describe the kind of transformation, but what we're looking to achieve is the transformation element. So absolutely, we find ourselves in a place where preserving life and economies mean how do we change the supply chains? How do we change the way we do business? How do we change the way, we buy and sell things? So yes, we are part of the village that's affected.
Okay, so you mentioned transformation, you mentioned digital. Immediately when you put those together, I start to think about digitization. Is that the same thing, digital transformation and digitization?
Not entirely, right? And I think the best way I tend to think about it is that digitization can be a part of digital transformation, right? But you can digitize without digitally transforming, so to speak. And I know it sounds really, so it can sound confusing because the words are so similar. So digital transformation, you're describing your transformation as digital and you're using technologies to transform your business, because we're talking about business here, but you can transform many things. Whereas digitization is literally taking a process and going digital with it. And I think your company, ExpressPay, and in Ghana is a great example, right? Because I have always been the kind of person who, because I'm an engineer, I like to find solutions and easier ways to do things. It's just the way I think about things. And when you think digital and you think payments, people have for so long been used to the physical action of actually going to make a payment either with cash, or as one of my friends in Ghana who runs a manufacturing company said, even with checks, she has customers who expect her to send someone to pick up the check in 2020. Mind-blowing. But if you take that same process and you go digital, I, for one, like to do all my banking online. It doesn't change the fact that I'm making a payment, whether it's by mobile money or whether it's to another bank account. What it has changed is the way I make the payment. I've gone digital. ExpressPay, you allow people to go digital. So you're digitizing a process, a payment process, which means you're reducing the need for human intervention and you're using technology to be more efficient in terms of bridging space and time. an aspect of digital transformation, but not the whole story.
Okay, that's interesting. As you mentioned, yes, our company ExpressPay has been sort of focused on providing a digital roadmap or a way for people to actually think about approaching the same problems differently. And I guess it can be expanded, as you mentioned, a bit more broadly. I like the example you mentioned about the manufacturing firm. How does this sort of work for them when you think about digitization? With a fintech, it's kind of easy to see sort of what digital transformation can mean, but can you shed a bit more light what this generally means then?
Yeah, so if I go more broadly and think about digital transformation, I think the starting point is that you want to think about the word, like I keep emphasizing the word transformation, because if you have a business and you want to transform it, then you have to start to think about, what is my business about? What is my business model? What's my vision for this business? Who are my target customers? Who's my audience? Who are my stakeholders? What are the processes that run this business? And when you can start to think about your business in these different aspects of it, which all form your business, right? All these come together to be your business. Then you start to think about, okay, so how do I transform this whole business, all these aspects of my business, and still deliver on my vision and still serve my customer, right? So it's really important for digital transformation that we break it down. Okay, so some simple things to think about up front. Who is my customer? What is the kind of journey that my customer goes on? I describe myself as a customer of a bank who likes to be able to go online, right, and do my banking transactions. Fair enough. Well, that particular organization, to transform and serve me, has to ask itself, do we have the right technology, right? It used to be that I had to always go to a website, which is still digital transformation, to do all my transactions. Now I can do them on an app. You take the website, put it on about, even more convenient for me. So you think about your customer, you think about your customer needs, you think about the technology that can support meeting that need more efficiently. But also you have to think internally. So do I have the processes that support this digital engagement with my customer? And more often than not, a mature business will have the processes, but they will be manual. They'll be handing off from one person to another. They'll be so in a business that wants to serve its customers with their digital front, you have to start thinking about your own processes. When I go online and I make that transaction, what systems does it hit in your organization, and does that flow effectively? When there's an error in my transaction, do you have the systems that quickly call up the error and send me a message and say, hey, Lucy, this transaction didn't go through? So you have to think about your customer. You have to think about whether you have the technology to serve, and also what kind of organizational workplace culture are you building to support that digital transformation? So even when you're transforming digitally, you can't lose sight of the fact that you're an organization that serves real customers, that is all, run by real people.
Okay, I think when you put it that way, you make me realize that it really is a process. It's not you wake up today or yesterday and you were not thinking about it, and all of a sudden today you can say that you're digitally transforming.
Yes.
It seems to be more to it than just...
It really, yeah, there's a whole lot more to it.
Okay. So when we think about this, just maybe taking a step back, why is this important really? Why is it important to today's business?
It's really important that we think about digital transformation and we work on executing digital transformation for a number of reasons. And perhaps to explain the why, it might help for me to explain a little bit around the how, because the how starts to tie us in on your why we should do it, right? So when you're, oh, I'm terribly sorry. Is that not me? Oh, apologies.
No worries.
Okay, let me just switch this off, which I thought was off. But that's what happens on the Mac systems. Digital transformation means they believe that every system has to be connected, so that it's easy for you to, okay, I'm not having a loss of joy here. Okay, apologies to our audience. That has taken all of a minute out of our conversation, and I'm sorry about that. But okay, so why is it important? First of all, let's think about how would we do it. So I've talked about the people aspect. I think I've made it very clear that it's about the people in your organization, right? Are they equipped? Do they have the right tools? Have you built the right culture? So you want to overlay an element of cultural transformation, which is around shifting mindsets. You want to think about your processes, and I take a step back and think about processes from an engineer's point of view. Before you can digitize your process as part of your whole digital transformation, you need to standardize your process. If you have a process where it is run in 10 different ways, if Lucy runs it, she does it a certain way, Kojo does it another way, Abna does it another way, Amma does it another way, that is not a standardized process. A standardized process is one where whether I do it, you do it, or someone else picks it up, it's documented and standardized and run a certain way, right? So if your process isn't standard, you can't digitize it, because digitization is making your standardized process more efficient. It's not creating the process for you. You must have your process already. So another thing that you think about, and I'm thinking along these P's now, is productivity. Because think about it, if a process is standardized and it's efficiently run, then it means that getting the job done can be easier and quicker. So I should be more productive. I should be able to do more than the things I used to do. And ultimately, as a business, if you can have the right culture because you focus on your people, you can standardize your processes and digitize them. You can be more productive because you introduce technology. Then ultimately you can be more profitable, because we have our revenue lines, which means that we can serve customers, we can scale up with technology and serve more customers. If we can serve the same customers more effectively because we're digitally transformed and we're running our businesses digitally, then the cost to serve should go down. And if the cost to serve goes down, then ultimately we should be more profitable, right? So this now takes us to why are we doing this? You have to do it because in this day and age, we have to be more productive, and especially on our continent of Africa, Ghana, so to speak, for the purposes of today's audience, we need to become much more productive. It is not an if or should we do it. It is when. We have to become more productive. Our productivity per capita is too low for the development that we need. We need to accelerate the development of our countries and our continent. And we need to do a lot of that through our businesses who are providing solutions. And if we're going to serve the over 1 billion people on the continent, then we need to be way more productive. So that's a long-winded answer to why should we do this anyway?
I think it explains it and brings it into the context. Hopefully, by taking this journey of going through the digital transformation, it will make businesses better able to serve their customers, and also as businesses make more money to be able to grow their businesses as well. But as you mentioned, it's a process, and sometimes in Ghana, we've been doing things for a very long time, the same way every day. It worked yesterday. Why? People may think, why do I need to do this today? What would you say to business leaders or owners who are thinking like that? That I sell water, sachet water. I've been doing the same thing every day. My customers aren't changing. My customers aren't digital, so to speak. Why is this relevant to me?
That's an interesting point. So first of all, I need to debunk one thing, which is your customers are changing. Okay. Every single day, your customers are changing. And I have to put a little bit of my telecoms hat on. Initially when I joined the telecom industry in 2008, the mobile penetration in Ghana, not smartphone, we didn't have smartphones. I know younger people think we've always had smartphones, but some of us know a world without smartphones. Telecom penetration in Ghana 2008 was 44%. We were all 2G. I remember having a relatively sophisticated phone, which was a BlackBerry running on 2G, and I would be in a place like Sishi, and when my email dropped, I was excited. Okay, young people on this call, do not laugh. It is the truth. I was really excited. Okay, fast forward to, it took Ghana much less than, it didn't take a decade. It must have taken about, I don't know, somewhere in the region of 6 or so years to get to over 100% penetration on voice. On data, penetration in Ghana is somewhere, I don't have the exact number off the top of my head because I haven't checked in a few months, but it's somewhere close to probably about half of the voice penetration, about 50% on mobile. In the cities, it's higher, right? Which means that if you were a company playing in the digital space, only in 2008, just 12 years ago, if you were running your model thinking that your customer is not changing, you're out of the water by now, right? Now, let's step out of telecoms and let's step into what's happening, what that actually means. It means that today, especially in our cities, but increasingly in our villages, I mean, I went to a funeral in my village in the Ashanti region, just my uncle's funeral two years ago. And I was shocked that, I was pleasantly surprised, shocked probably, I did feel the shock, but pleasantly surprised that in our village, everybody had access to digital services. There was 3G everywhere in the village, right? Not in Kumasi, in the village. So what's my point? My point is that your customers are shifting. It means that your customer now has access to use digital, which means that you as a business, you either find ways to serve them differently, as we talked about earlier, or someone else who finds ways to serve them differently will take your customer away. And it can sound extremely sophisticated, like our insurance industry, where really admirably, Hollard Ghana now has a digital chat service. So when you inquire about your insurance needs, you don't always have to actually speak to somebody. I think she's called, is it Abna Hollard or Adra Hollard? There's a Hollard, avatar that engages you before you even speak to anyone, right? Even our smaller businesses that, say, for instance, sell hair care products, now have digital interfaces where you can literally have a chat, those automated responses on their WhatsApp. You can order online and it will be delivered to you. They say they're bringing it tomorrow. You can go through that entire process and not engage with anyone until the delivery. The delivery, of course, of physical goods, so that gets delivered. So if you were a seller, a retailer who thought, I'm selling hair care products, nothing is changing. So I have my table, I have my storefront and I've arranged my things and, customers are all the same, so I'm not going to shift anything. Versus the person who can now serve thousands of customers centrally, by distributing and going through this digital process without actually having to interact with them, who's attracting a bigger customer base? Because also bear in mind that what the person has done now is aggregated demand. Because if I'm making a delivery and I know that I have an order from Odoko, Official Town, Malam, Kaneshi, Waja, I have all these orders, what do? I aggregate them, right? Yeah. And reduce the cost to serve, because I've managed to aggregate it digitally, and reduce the cost to serve by making sure that the same delivery journey goes to all these locations. So instead of having 5 customers come to me, I provided the service to all 5 of them through a delivery and through a digital means, which means that I can probably actually get my money even sooner. So it all starts to add up. I mean, I could talk about this all day, from the smallest company to the largest company in Ghana. Digital transformation has a role to play. Now, it goes back to the owners and the people running the business. Are you prepared to go through this change? Because it is a change we're talking about.
I think that's a critical point you're raising. I like the examples that you highlighted. Very kind of top of the line chatbots. The Holland has introduced, I think, a couple of other firms in Ghana have that as well. Yes. Even maybe want to highlight as well, maybe something like ECG did with the call center that they put in place, which was a simple, I think, tool that they used to make it easier for customers to report faults. and help ECG also interact with customers, address any queries they have. So you're right. These are things that maybe at the same time, even the customers are beginning to demand, and businesses are also starting to provide. But as you mentioned, it is a process
Yes.
that companies have to essentially commit to going through. There probably will be costs associated with this. In your mind, what really are the challenges to businesses in Ghana being able to essentially start off down that path of digital transformation?
I think the number one challenge is mindset. And you highlighted a bit of it when you made the statement, well, what if I'm a business and I say my customers are not changing? And I think the first thing you have to shift in this change journey is your mindset. A mindset that embraces the fact that the Ghanaian customer continues to grow and mature, does want more services, does want more efficiently delivered services, and is going to demand more innovation of you. And that's one aspect we didn't touch on. But one of the other benefits of digital transformation is that efficiency doesn't only give you productivity, but it frees up resources for you to innovate and come up with new products and services serving the same customer base, which is great because as a business you make more money. So the number one thing is mindset. I think sometimes we assume that digital transformation is such a sophisticated way of running a business that, quote unquote, it's not for us. Because sometimes we have a diminished way of looking at what we do and who we are. Look, it's an overgeneralization. I appreciate that. And it's not every business in Ghana, but I'm speaking more to the ones who are hesitant, the ones who are thinking, oh, if I engage a company like Express Pay to make my payments more efficient, oh my goodness, how much do I have to pay them? No, I'm not going to pay. Instead of thinking, wow, if I engage an improved payment platform, I can serve this many more customers, I can be more efficient, I can make more money, I can be more productive and innovative. So number one is the mindset. The second thing is that if you can get past the mindset, then you do have to set aside some resources to invest in digital transformation, right? So I talked about standardizing your processes that already exist, which is really important because don't digitize something that hasn't been standardized and fixed. You'll be wasting your time and money. But so you need to invest in allowing people the time to re-engineer your processes to make them efficient and standardized. And then you want to invest in the technologies and the people know-how to actually digitize your business and go through that, digitize some of your processes, but go through that overall digital transformation. The other thing, probably the last thing I would add as a sort of top of the list is that take a long-term view, because it's not the case in most digital transformations that you get it over and done with, in no time. I think the smaller your business is, the quicker you can go through your digital transformation. The earlier you get it done in your business life cycle, the better, because then you can kind of tweak it and improve it and expand. But for companies that are already really, really big or medium to large size, it can possibly take you a couple of years, even more, maybe even 3 to 4 years. I think you should be able to take that long-term view and look at what that will do for the business overall, and look at the fact that it will increase the longevity of your business into the future. Do you want a business that's just here for today and for you? Or do you want one that will transcend, your own leadership and your presence at the company? Because as a country, as a continent, we need more and more businesses that are going to survive really long term into the future. Again, back to my ultimate goal, to make our economies and our countries grow and make us more prosperous overall.
Okay. So yes, this commitment that businesses need to take on, as you mentioned, that they may need to actually invest in this process, and they need to think long term. To help that, are there any things that government needs to actually do? Are there specific policies that government needs to put in place? What has Ghana done right, maybe in this regard, and maybe what are some ideas as well that maybe you think the government can actually take on board to help make it easier for companies to start this process?
Yes, I'll start with what Ghana has done right. When you look at, for instance, the point I made about standardization of processes before you go digital, I mean, I recently went to the passport office, the one that's on the same grounds as the digital center, Accra Digital Center, and I was really impressed by the smoothness with which the process runs. Granted, some adjustments had been made because of COVID, so you couldn't, directly sit next to people. But I was impressed by that because the process had been adjusted, the experience had been adjusted to take that into account. But it was such a smooth process that I can definitely envisage a situation where it becomes, even more efficient through digitization, right? I think when the touch points that people have with government become increasingly efficient and increasingly digitized, it sets an example and creates a tone, right? Because after all, the government is the biggest organization in the country, which means that the vast majority, the highest percentage of interactions are probably with the government more than and I say government broadly in terms of the institutions and the parastatal organizations. So that's a great example of setting the tone. When you talk about, policies and so on, I think it has to be the case that, look, in COVID, the response has been very swift and in terms of protecting the country. And if you look at it, we've tried really hard to use means available to us to provide some access to education for children, which has all had to be digital. Whether, a TV is a digital device as well as a computer. Those of us who studied engineering, it was all, how do you transmit a signal? It's a signal, different kinds of signals, but it's a signal. So we've also demonstrated through that we need to start thinking of different ways of providing education as a service. So those are some really clear examples. If we started from the top, it's that. Where I think we do, two suggestions I would have really very directly is that in the internal workings and operations of some of our ministerial organizations, again, parastatal organizations, need to look at how to standardize some of their processes and operations and how, when people engage with them, how does that come across? And so we need to build those efficiencies into the way the government actually runs. A lot more, and again, that sets the tone. I think the other area that I would say you need we can improve is some of our. So for instance, and I stand to be correct. I'm very happy for a member of the audience to correct me on this. But in my interactions, even if you pay your tax or your social security online, which you can do, you can pay directly to the account. So that's a tick, that's a plus. But the fact that you still have to present the paperwork is not. So we need to find a way that ensures that if I make a digital payment on tax or SNIT, there's a way of matching that I paid it, and so I don't have to physically present the paper. So we've digitized an aspect of it. There's a way to go. And again, I stand to be corrected. That has been my most recent experience. Maybe in the week since, everything has changed. I could be wrong. I'm always open to correction. But if we're going to, we're transforming digitally, let's go the whole 9 yards, right? And I understand that some of it comes from the need for we don't always have fully transparent processes, or we don't always trust that the right person is doing the right thing. I think the way to get around that is to make sure that there's a strong matching process. And I think by the time we get things like digital IDs sorted and we can identify every citizen, maybe that makes it easier. But I think at the moment we have proxies. We have proxies like your SNIT number and your TIN as well, that we can use to get around some of these. So those are my thoughts based on experience. I speak based on experience.
Thank you very, very much, Lucy, for these thoughts and insights. You really brought this process of digital transformation, I think, to life and made it very practical and relevant to us. At this point, we'll take a brief pause here to do a brief survey from our participants today, and we'll come back afterwards to sort of wrap the session up. So, okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, great. I think if most of you didn't realize, this was actually a pre-recorded session. So we didn't want to run into any unfortunate mishaps for the majority of the session. But thank you ever so much for joining us and being with us. Welcome again, Lucy.
Thank you.
Yeah. So we did a quick poll. Most of the people on the platform today with us here are government officials. So Lucy, that'll help in terms of some of the thinking of what we're doing. We have, I guess, the next big segment of people who are participating with us today are entrepreneurs. So maybe in terms of some of the insights you provide subsequently, we can tailor them a bit more towards them. But
Absolutely.
yeah, I think we have some questions actually from the audience today. So maybe I'll just run through and you can share your thoughts on them.
Yes. Hello, everyone. Good to see you again.
Yeah, the first of which I think is kind of interesting, and it's digital transformation requires fast and reliable internet. How do you address this issue when the cost of internet is so expensive? And maybe I'll also talk about the reliability and the coverage of internet are also things which can be improved.
Yeah. Look, first and foremost, I would say that everywhere we find ourselves, there is room for improvement. And this conversation around our ability to have appropriate internet service, I do think has an element of bias in it. And let me explain why. So today I've joined you from the UK, but I was in Ghana for the lockdown. I arrived in Ghana at the end of March on the last flight, and I spent 5 months in Ghana. And the entire time I was in Ghana, I worked from home online, dialing into my work computer in the UK every single day, right? So first of all, I think we need to debunk this notion that you can't get reliable internet in Ghana. We can. Fair enough, to your point about coverage, it may not be in every single location, which has some truth to it, but we do have some major densely populated parts of Accra, Kumasi, Takoradi, our major cities, where you can actually get very reliable internet. And I'll be honest with you, I made sure that I had more than one service provider because it was really important. Now, I don't tend to like to overly personalize my examples, but I think this is a relevant example because being able to dial into a server is actually a big deal remotely. So we do have service. So one is that we need to find ways to actually either if where we live is not fully covered or where we work isn't fully covered, then there are solutions to that. And it's probably easier for a workplace location because you have a concentration of people there that can pull together and actually get a much better service. That leads me on to the other part of the question, which is around cost, which again is a very relevant question. So it's really hard to actually counter that argument because in as much as our mobile telephony is relatively cheap compared to many places in the world. So when you're using your mobile phone to access the internet, the cost per gig is actually quite low. But to have reliable work services, you need something, typically you need more than a mobile service. You need a 4G service or a fixed line service or a point-to-point connection. I completely get that. So we do have a challenge on the cost relative to earning power. Again, in absolute terms, the cost may not be too far off from what is in other locations, but relative to earning capability, we do have some work to do. Look, I think that we continually have interventions and engagements across the industry and with regulators and the government to address that. But one way I would definitely encourage our participation and how we can help as citizens is that actually the more of us who sign up to this service, we reduce the cost to serve. because that's also part of the challenge. Imagine if you built a cell site or you built a point-to-point connection and only 5 households in the whole area you're connected to sign up to the service. Effectively, your cost to serve becomes very high. I think the other thing is that the input costs, again, this is not something the audience can deal with, the operators have to manage, the input costs are high. So I think, can we get reliable services? My answer is yes, especially in locations where it matters most. The cost of the services relative to income is something we're going to have to continue to address, because in relative terms, I appreciate it can be high. So that feels like half of the answer, and yet it is as truthful as I can get. I'm not going to kind of like just sugarcoat it and make it and say to you, there's nothing to see here. I think it's just a question of relativity.
Okay, I think that's very useful, especially when you start thinking about the costs. And actually, Peter has a question that I think is very relevant to that in terms of the ownership of the underlying infrastructure. So let me read this question. It says, okay, the backbone of digital transformation is the fiber optic network. And these are all owned by telcos. Like all infrastructure, example, the roads and highways, there's typically a combination of government ownership and I guess a public-private partnership approach could be used. Given that the next generation is digitization, do you think it's time to rethink the ownership structure so that it is possible to provide air access and a more equitable approach to this?
Actually, my simple answer is no, which is a very closed answer. So at one point when I was working for Vodafone, I was actually running the wholesale business, which was the government infrastructure that got sold on. Look, I think in a digital, especially a fiber-led journey, if you look at examples of the UK, we studied examples of Singapore and so on. At some stage early in the journey, when the subscription is extremely low and the investment needs are very high, in many countries you find that governments start to build this infrastructure. And then some of this infrastructure gets eventually sold on and spun out to private companies. And why is that? Because in commercial terms, governments aren't commercial entities. And to be honest, in terms of core competence and skills, governments anywhere in the world are not the best people to run a commercial entity. It's just not the core competence of governing. Governing and policy making and regulating is very different from commercialization. And the other risk you face if the government runs all the commercial infrastructure, who checks on the government, right? When you have a separation between who owns and runs the commercial infrastructure versus who regulates it, then you have some checks and balances in place. So I don't think it's a matter of handing it over to the government. It's really a matter of continuing on the trajectory and the journey of building out our fiber infrastructure. Sometimes when we have these conversations, we don't always compare apples to apples. We compare ourselves today with others. Let me qualify that. Before telecommunications went digital, in fact, before it even went mobile, in many countries, it was all cables, right? And it was the cable infrastructure that provided fixed line. And that cable infrastructure became sort of the foundation that would eventually evolve into sort of the fiber-led, so cables were replaced and you put fiber optic cables, right? Why is this relevant? Because at the time, some of the countries we compare ourselves to, when people didn't have mobile phones, they still had fixed connections to their homes and offices, right? What was our experience? Our experience was that actually we always had very limited fixed subscription in Accra, I think Kumasi, and maybe one other city, but it was very, very limited when we had just Ghana Telecom, if you recall. Maybe some of you might be a bit young. And so we went from that very limited base, it's a really small base relative to our population, straight to mobile, right? And mobile was a big boom for us. And then we had to go back to fiber. Well, guess what? the fiber, the fiber, especially last mile fiber that goes to people's homes and to offices, was not there. We had fiber connecting sites and making it more efficient, but we hadn't built out fiber in terms of last mile and the way cable was a last mile. So we're on a journey, which thankfully we have now created. I think Ghana has done a great job in creating a combination of not just fiber to people's homes, but actually decently reliable fixed mobile services. So my point is that I don't think what we need is a handover to government. It's not the most efficient way to run a commercial entity. What we need to do is actually continue on the journey and the trajectory that we've done. And where government can play a role, I guess, is to support with some of the policies and regulations, and also the vision of where Ghana wants to go on its digital journey, so that commercial businesses can take a cue from that and fall in line and work together to achieve that.
Thank you. Let me move on to another question that we got, which is that digital transformation generates a large amount of data, which also needs to be processed and used for decision making. As a country, is this something which, as a country, we need to think about, or is it more of a private enterprise that needs to be undertaken by entrepreneurs? And what do we need to do to think about that?
This is a very complicated question. And it's a question that actually speaks to something that really concerns me, because we are already generating huge amounts of data, right? Let me know, even before I talk about commercial businesses, every time you post a photo, every time you comment, every time you send a message, that's all digital. Every time you plot that route on your map, every time your Fitbit records what you're doing, every single day, every single one of us in Ghana is generating huge amounts of data. So let's establish the fact that the data generation isn't the future, it's here and now, right? So then back to the heart of the question, what are we going to do about it? It's a combination, I believe, of both the commercial business entities and enterprises and government, because a lot of the data being generated is actually being generated by private businesses, right? So in the earlier chat, we talked about transactions. We talked about how businesses have to serve people better and differently. Every single one of those has multiple data points, information and data that the commercial business should be storing, because it's for future reference, for track record, for actually analyzing and understanding their customer behavior, so on and so forth. So we've established that the data is being generated. We've established that actually in the first instance, a lot of the data generated is quote unquote owned by the entity that manages the data sourcing and so on. In terms of storing the data, actually in Ghana, we have a glut of data centers that are both government built and privately built. So data centers to store the data are not our biggest, a big challenge. Maybe there's a cost associated with it and we need to store the data and so on. Then that leads me to the final part of your question was about what do we do with the data? And this probably is the part that concerns me more than anything else. Now, I know from past experience that we do have data protection and some data protection laws in Ghana and regulation. We need to continue to build our capacity around regulation to protect what data can and cannot be used for. We need legislation that ensures the enforcement of whatever those regulations are, and also the appropriate means of prosecuting if there are breaches. At the same time, we need to actually use data beneficially. And that's where my concern lies. My concern lies in the fact that we, as far as my experience goes, have such a limited number of data scientists who really, I'm not talking the simple analysis, data scientists who can really crunch that data, crunch big data. We have a very limited number. And to put that into perspective, I remember about 3 years ago, I visited, it's 2 years, I visited one of these massive online businesses. I won't name it, it's a global business, but it was one business, right? And they did this seminar and I went along and I sat in and I listened. And this single business had 60 data scientists, PhD level data scientists, 60 of them. And I sat in the audience, and the only thing that came to mind was, wow, I wonder whether I can find 60 PhD level data scientists in the whole of Ghana. And I've asked the question repeatedly of many people who I think are in the know, and I come up short. I haven't even found 5 at that level. Now that I say it's basic inquiry within my network, so it could be more than that. But you see the relative, what I'm trying to put across here. We have a huge opportunity with the data that's being generated in wanting Ghana to become, a leader when it comes to digital and in Africa and around the world. And we need to develop the skills to actually manage that data, to monetize that data, to do better as companies with it. I'm afraid to say that on that particular point, we do have a distance to travel.
Okay. So given the audience that we have today, there are some government officials here, very specifically, both in terms of policy and also in terms of activities that government itself as a service delivery agent can take on. What specific things would you want them to walk away with in terms of key points that they should be looking and thinking about? You've mentioned, human capital. Are there other very specific policies that maybe you want to help them bring their minds towards?
I think if we use human capital as one example, because the question you ask is such a loaded question, right? As one area, then it starts to say that actually the support that we need goes beyond just one particular organization, right? Within, and we're speaking specifically about government here. So, what kind of education are people getting? What are the opportunities to actually train in data science? How much capacity do we have in the country to train data scientists? How do we ensure that the people who may not be data scientists but have access to data fully understand the importance of the accuracy of data? And I found this, unfortunately, where, for instance, you engage and someone's capturing your address and they write the wrong address. It happened to be very recently in Accra. The instance shall remain nameless, but I wasn't happy because the person insisted that it was okay to capture a wrong address for me for something that was actually, from an ID point of view, extremely important. So I refused to continue the process. I went away, I went home, I came back and the next day and I said, look, I need to do this, but I'm not going to let you enter in your database an address that is not my address. So this whole attitude of, it doesn't matter, it's just a minor error, your accuracy really, really matters. If we're going to become a data-oriented, data-driven country, data that is inaccurate is effectively useless because it will lead you to make wrong decisions. So it's not just the human capacity of the data scientist, it's the capacity around understanding the importance of clean, accurate data is a major factor. And also the ability to protect the data that you have access to, the data that you're privy to, understand what you're privy to. If you don't have sort of levels of access requirements based on people's responsibility, then make sure you introduce that, because it's really important that all data is available to everyone and it is used appropriately. So I think a lot of my ultimate point is that where we are today in our journey, we need to get people to a point of understanding that, look, data is the new oil, it's the new gold, it's the new everything, because we live in an information age and you draw inferences from data. I mean, the hearsay and conjecture is not information. Inferences from data, that's real information we can make decisions from. So let's get that right.
I like that. It's important to get the right data. And you mentioned things like addresses, KYC information. So I think some of the things which government is doing in terms of the national ID system, the national address system, these really feed into this new data-centric model that comes with transformation, right?
They absolutely do, but they have to be accurate. right? Because this leads me to my example, and it was a state interaction that the person thought it was okay to capture an incorrect piece of information. Now, does that mean that I blame the entire institution? Certainly not. But this one person I was dealing with thought it was okay to enter his own proxy for my address. And so that means that that person on the front line, the system is fine. There's nothing wrong with the system. The process is fine, but that human interaction, and if I wasn't me, because apparently they'd done it to other people, they just enter whatever address they wanted to enter because it's easier, it involves less pain. So we do also make sure that people, not just the systems are right, but the people are right to take advantage of the systems being introduced.
Okay. So you mentioned before that this, digital transformation is a process. So as a country, realistically, what kind of time frame should we be setting ourselves to go down this process?
This is a very interesting question, and it's one that I am unfortunately going to disappoint you on, because it's hard to give a time frame, and I tell you why. It's not just about the introduction of the systems, but really the adoption of the systems and processes. So do I think, and if you think about it, the systems and the processes build on each other, right? So if we don't get the baseline right, the next step becomes more difficult and more difficult and more difficult. So what I would rather encourage people to in terms of everyone listening is that we actually have to treat our digital transformation as a country as a matter of urgency. So urgent means that as soon as possible. If you wanted my simple answer, I would have said yesterday. When do we have to transform? But I would have said yesterday. But that's not a realistic response. So the more realistic response is that let us all treat it as a priority, as a matter of urgency. Right? We're a country that has demonstrated a huge capacity to adopt new technologies, new ways of doing things, when we want to, right? And then in another instance is where, oh, the old way is fine, let's just leave it. I don't know why you're making life hard, blah, blah, blah. If we can all make that mental shift to saying that, look, in this age, digital transformation it's not even a requirement, a requisite, it is the future. We're living through a pandemic. What the pandemic has done is just accelerated the process for many institutions and countries because we're left with no choice. But it's not as though we weren't on these journeys before, because we needed these journeys. There's a recognition that we need to digitally transform, but COVID has accelerated that. So everyone on the call, let's treat this with urgency. It's really important.
Thank you very much. So now switching over to maybe the entrepreneurs who are listening, I think one question came up was what resources are available to companies who want to go through the digital transformation process? Are there consultancy firms who can assist them, or are there particular resources, for example, books that you would recommend that they read?
Oh gosh, there are glass of books. It's hard to really push any specific book, but honestly, and some of it's not even books you need to buy. Some of this information is available freely online. I remember spending time looking at the software release process that Spotify applies, right? And they kind of really adapted their model, and it's improved their time to market. And this is all free on YouTube. So I would say that, first of all, in terms of access, the knowledge, if you're starting on this journey, don't jump into spending lots of money. I would say first try and do as much self-study as you possibly can, what's available online, but also connecting with other companies who may have done this and just sort of pick their brains, because you don't want to jump straight to spending money. You want to seriously give this thought and plan it. The second thing I'd say around companies that provide consulting services around this, I think we have a few, not sort of massively big presence, but we do have a few on the ground that you can connect with. But I would definitely say don't engage that conversation until you have taken the time to understand what it is you're looking for, because it can be in phases. I remember one of my former colleagues saying to a group we were speaking to that sometimes for your company, your digital transformation just starts from the process whereby you take a piece of paper from the controller to the finance manager to sign, to the marketing manager to sign, to this one to sign, and you make it electronic. And there's no walking around with paper. And maybe that's your first step in transforming, where suddenly, instead of walking around with a piece of paper, you have adopted an online system where I can approve and the next person can approve and the next person can approve. And you start to test the waters and see what your organization is like. Or you go for payments and you say, okay, we used to do only cash, now we do mobile money. Actually, now in addition to mobile money, we're going to find an intermediary that allows mobile money, Visa, all these other platforms. And you build up that way before you dive into the massive spend. Now, if these things that I describe are things you're already doing, great. And I would say in that case, then you might want to consider the investment of having, a consultant come and look at your entire business and make recommendations, or you recruit someone who has this experience to lead the digital transformation for you.
Thank you very, very much. Lucy, I think we're pretty much out of time, and this conversation has been extremely interesting and provoking. But before we leave, are there any final thoughts you'd like to share?
My final thoughts are this: I think every single sector of our country could do with being sort of more efficient, more effective. That goes without saying. I think in the earlier conversation, I talked about the fact that we need to be more productive, because as we increase our productivity, we will actually shift our development and accelerate it. And it's something I also actually wrote about in my book. We need to accelerate our development. Technologies are accelerated. We don't have the luxury of waiting around. So I would say to everyone, don't treat this as just a government responsibility or an entrepreneur's responsibility or a school's responsibility, so on and so forth. It is our collective responsibility to bring this to life. We will get there quicker if we do this together. So I hope we can all walk away with a sense of, okay, I need to figure out what I need to do on this journey to make it go quicker. Those would be my last thoughts.
Thank you very, very much, Lucy. We really appreciate it. For those of you who'd like to learn more about business transformation, I'd encourage you to get Lucy's book, The Bold New Normal. A shameless plug from me for you. But yes, we're looking forward to seeing a lot more businesses in Ghana embrace the digital transformation process. And hopefully that will drive a revolution of change and growth in our post-COVID world. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today, and have a great afternoon.